It was still warm. That was the first thing I noticed. Callie's red sweater was draped over the kitchen chair, sloppily, like she'd taken it off in a rush, like someone had been pulling it off her. It was the same sweater I had bought her last winter, the one she said was too itchy to wear. Now it reeked of unfamiliar cologne. The second thing I noticed, 2 wine glasses in the sink. Both rinsed, but not washed. Rookie mistake. And then the final detail that made my chest hollow out like an old tree. My Spotify account was open on the TV. A playlist was playing. One I didn't make. I was supposed to be in Vermont. My boss had scheduled a surprise 3-day strategy retreat for the leadership team, and I was already halfway there when the snowstorm hit and shut down the highway. I doubled back, frustrated, exhausted, and ready to sleep in my own bed. But I wasn't supposed to be home. She didn't expect me back. The house felt off the moment I walked in. Not messy, not broken into, just lived in wrong, like someone had rearranged the air. I didn't call out her name. I just stood there, listening. The heater clicked. Pipes moaned. No voices. No movement. But the feeling, the weight in my stomach, that stayed. I checked our bedroom. Empty. Neat. Her vanity was smudged, foundation brush still damp. There was a single, tiny gold cufflink on the floor near the nightstand. I don't wear cufflinks. Not gold ones. And that's when it started. The shaking. Not rage. Not even grief. Just the kind of numb panic that feels like static in your bones. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe. My eyes darted around like a detective on a crime scene. And maybe that's what it was. A quiet crime. A theft with no fingerprints. She came home 2 hours later. Hair damp. Smelling like hotel soap. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We slept in the same bed, separated by 5 inches of silence that might as well have been a canyon. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Because anger is fast. Anger fades. I was something slower. Something worse. I was calculating. The next morning, I woke up before her, like I always did. Only this time, I didn't make coffee or open the blinds like some obedient husband resetting the stage. I just sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the turned-off TV, trying to remember how we got here. Not in the broad, sentimental way. I mean literally. How the hell did this woman, this person, become a stranger sleeping 6 feet away from me? She walked into the kitchen around 9 a.m., her robe tied tighter than usual, avoiding eye contact, as if she could still sell the illusion that nothing had happened. She kissed the top of my head and said, "You're quiet." I nodded. She didn't ask anything else. She just made her smoothie and disappeared into her home office, closing the door like she always did during her so-called client calls. But that day, I started taking inventory. Not of objects, of moments. The weird laugh she had let out 2 weeks ago when she said she was going to book club, but couldn't remember the name of the book. The time she asked me to pick up her dry cleaning from a place across town I'd never heard of, even though she'd always used the place 2 blocks from work. The missed calls labeled no caller ID that she claimed were spam, but always made her flinch when they came during dinner. And then there was the charger. A second charger under the bed. Same model as mine, same brand, but not mine. No scratches, nowhere. Brand new. I never asked about it. I just placed it on her side of the nightstand one morning. She didn't say a word. Just moved it to a drawer and never brought it up again. These were the breadcrumbs. And I followed every one of them without making a sound. She thought I was shutting down, spiraling. And I was. But not in the way she assumed. I wasn't falling apart. I was preparing. That night, she said she had a late yoga class. I smiled and told her to enjoy it. I even offered to warm up dinner for her when she got back. She smiled back. Too easy. She left in her gray hoodie, phone tucked in her waistband, and didn't even bother to glance back. I waited exactly 6 minutes before I got into my car and followed. She wasn't headed to the gym. Not even close. She drove 30 minutes across the city to a hotel near the airport. Not a sleazy one, either. One of those corporate boutique places with valet parking and $18 cocktails. She didn't hesitate. Walked right in like she owned the place. I didn't follow her inside. I didn't need to. I waited. And 42 minutes later, I saw him. Same guy from the cufflink. Tall. Sharp haircut. The kind of guy who stands too close when he talks to women. He came out first, adjusting his collar, not in a hurry. She came out after, a full 5 minutes later, with her hair tucked under a beanie and a takeout bag in her hand. She looked happy. I wasn't angry. Not even jealous. What I felt was deeper than that. It was like watching a house you spent years building start to burn from the inside, but you're not running to put it out. You're just watching from the lawn, soaking wet with gasoline. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I realized. She still had no idea, no clue that I was awake, watching, recording. She thought I was mourning, but I was evolving. And the version of me she left behind on that couch, he's never coming back. The days that followed were like watching a movie where you already know the ending, but you still sit through it, waiting to see just how bad it gets. She floated around the house like nothing was wrong, humming while she brushed her hair, answering texts a little too fast, pretending she didn't notice the weight in the air. But I wasn't really there anymore, not the version of me she remembered. I had become something else, quieter, sharper. I stopped trying to talk to her. Instead, I started to listen. I started to collect. I found a rhythm in her routine, and it was disturbingly predictable. Morning runs where her GPS tracker mysteriously glitched between 6:40 and 7:10. Coffee dates that weren't on her shared calendar. Receipts that disappeared from her wallet but showed up in the trash under layers of paper towels. I stopped questioning it. I stopped feeling altogether. I just documented every call, every message, every lie she thought slipped through. I created a folder on my laptop labeled simply Wednesday. It was a joke, but it stuck. Wednesday was the day I stopped being her husband and started being her observer. One night, around midnight, I woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating under her pillow. That wasn't new, but what was new was the name that flashed on the screen. AB. I didn't need to think long to decode that one. Arlo Beaumont. The cufflink. The hotel. The smirk. I watched her grab the phone and walk out into the hallway, whispering so softly that the floor creaked louder than her voice. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I just let her walk right into her own story, one I was now writing silently behind her. When she came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped under the blanket, her back turned, the faint smell of hotel soap clinging to her hair. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, and that's when I realized something strange. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't even angry. It was like my emotions had been replaced with a calm, steady calculation. I didn't want revenge in the movie sense of the word. I didn't want to scream or destroy or expose. What I wanted was far quieter and far more terrifying. I wanted her to feel what I felt. The moment she realizes the life she built was already over, long before she noticed it. So I started rearranging little things. Nothing obvious, just enough to tilt her reality. I changed the pin on the joint account. I moved her favorite necklace from her jewelry box to the freezer. I unsubscribed her from the gym's email list, so her check-in reminders would stop coming through. I deleted the draft she'd been working on for her marketing pitch, the one she'd spent weeks perfecting, and watched her break down trying to find it. Every time she'd ask, "Did you move this?" I'd look up from my laptop and say, "No, maybe you're just tired." Always calm, always gentle. The best part? She started to believe it. She started to question herself. I could see it in the way she'd pause mid-sentence, or stop halfway down the hall like she'd forgotten what she was doing. She began taking vitamins for mental clarity, drinking more coffee, and leaving sticky notes around the house like she was afraid her mind was slipping. I didn't need to gaslight her. She was doing it to herself now. One evening, she came home late and found me sitting in the dark again, same as that first night. She asked if everything was okay. I smiled and said, "Better than ever." And it was true. For the first time in years, I felt in control. She didn't know that while she was out meeting him, I had started seeing someone else too, but not in the way she thought. My someone was a private investigator, a quiet, unremarkable man named Sutton who'd been tailing her for 3 weeks. Every photo, every timestamp, every line neatly cataloged in a digital folder that sat behind a password she'd never guess. By the time she started suspecting that I knew, it was already too late. I had everything, every piece of the puzzle. She'd look at me across the dinner table, eyes searching for anger or confrontation, and find nothing. Just that quiet, detached calm that terrified her more than shouting ever could. And still, she tried to play normal. Little jokes, half-hearted affection, conversations about weekend plans that would never happen. But I could see it, the panic behind her smile. The tiny fractures starting to spread across her perfect little world. The haunting realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the fool she thought I was. She had no idea that by the end of this, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose herself. 2 weeks passed, and she still hadn't said a word. Not about the missing files on her laptop. Not about the disappearing texts. Not even about the strange voicemail she got from her dentist's office confirming an appointment she never made. One I had, of course, rescheduled from her phone when she left it unattended in the bathroom. Just little things. Glitches. Enough to make her pause. Enough to keep her off balance. That was the point. It was never about punishing her. It was about dismantling her certainty. I didn't know when exactly it would happen, but I knew it was coming. There's a moment every liar faces, where their reality bends so hard under the weight of their own deceit that something snaps. I wasn't sure if it would be a panic attack, a breakdown, a confession, or maybe silence. Total, heavy silence. But I knew she was close. You could see it in the way she double-checked the locks before bed. The way she scrolled through her phone with her screen tilted just enough away from me. The way she hesitated before saying my name. Then, it finally came, not with a bang, but with a smile. "Let's have dinner this weekend," she said one morning, while stirring oat milk into her coffee. "Somewhere nice. Just you and me. I feel like we've both been distracted." She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. But she didn't need to. I knew what it meant. A peace offering. Or worse, a test. I agreed, told her to pick the place, make the reservation, the works. She beamed, like I'd fallen for it. And that's when I knew this wasn't just guilt anymore. She was starting to panic. She needed control back. She needed to remind herself that I was still the safe, predictable husband who made her toast and paid the utility bills and never asked questions. The kind of man she could cheat on and still expect a shoulder rub before bed. It was almost sweet. Almost. Friday night came. She wore a black silk dress I hadn't seen since our anniversary 2 years ago, probably because it had a broken zipper I'd never gotten around to fixing. I noticed it was still broken. She had pinned it shut with a safety pin from the inside, the kind she kept in her travel sewing kit. That detail stuck with me for some reason. That's how fragile this all was. Held together by borrowed time and cheap metal. We drove to the restaurant in silence. One of those moody, low-lit places with overpriced entrees and 5-word menu items that didn't actually explain what you were ordering. She talked a bit about work, about how crazy busy the office had been. I nodded, laughed in the right places. But the entire time, I was looking for signs, not of love or hope or even closure, but of strategy. She wasn't reconnecting. She was buying time. I could tell. Halfway through her glass of wine, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "I miss us," she said, eyes just glossy enough to look sincere, but not wet enough to ruin her mascara. She was good. I'll give her that. Years of lying had made her a pro, but she was forgetting something. I wasn't the same audience anymore. So I smiled. I squeezed her hand. I leaned in and said, "You know what? Let's do something crazy." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Let's get away. Next weekend. Just the two of us. Somewhere off-grid. Like a cabin. No phones, no distractions." Her eyes flickered for just a second too long. That was it. That was the tell. "Oh," she said, forcing a laugh. "That's spontaneous of you, right?" I smiled wider. "I already found a place. It's perfect. Quiet. Isolated. You'll love it." She nodded. She said yes. What else could she say? But I could feel it, that fracture. That little tear in the mask. It was widening. We finished dinner. Drove home. She held my hand in the car. And the whole time, I imagined the calculations spinning behind her eyes. Would she tell him? Cancel? Try to manipulate the situation somehow? The thing is, I didn't care. The trip wasn't for her. Not really. It was for me. Because I had no intention of confronting her in the way she expected. No dramatic confession. No raised voice or "how could you" speech. I had learned that the loudest revenge is the one whispered so quietly it never gets traced back to you. And in that cabin, away from cell service, away from excuses, something was going to shift. Not in her. In me. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, about 2 hours north of the city. Pine trees stretched up into gray, silent sky, their branches creaking like old bones in the wind. It was the kind of place brochures call cozy and survivalists call perfect. No cell signal. No neighbors. Just one long, gravel road that disappeared into the forest if you missed the single left turn off the main highway. I'd booked it under a fake name, prepaid for the week, and made sure the owner was out of state. No digital trail. No loose ends. Callie didn't ask many questions on the drive up. She scrolled through her phone most of the time, faking interest in landscape photos she wasn't taking. She still didn't know I'd installed software on her phone weeks ago. I wasn't spying. Not in the cartoonish, insecure way she probably imagined. I wasn't reading every text or listening in. I just needed one thing: patterns. And by now, I had learned all of them. She called him A in her notes. She deleted their texts almost immediately, but not fast enough. I'd seen enough to know they weren't in love. Not really. He was an escape. A mirror. Someone who let her feel wild and uninhibited for an hour or two before she returned home to the life she claimed she wanted. Neat, stable, responsible. I was the cage. He was the window. But what she never considered was that sometimes the cage remembers how to open. When we arrived, she stepped out of the car and smiled. That fake, curated smile she used for Instagram stories. "It's beautiful," she said, pulling her scarf tight. So quiet. Exactly. I watched her walk through the small living room, into the kitchenette, and then upstairs to the lofted bedroom. Everything was wood, floors, walls, even the bathroom counter. Every sound echoed slightly, like the whole house was holding its breath. She lit a candle on the nightstand. Lavender. Said it helped her sleep. That night, we made dinner. Pasta. Salad. Cheap wine from a bottle she'd picked out at a gas station on the way up. We didn't talk much. She scrolled through old photos on her phone like a bored teenager while I sat across the table watching her chew, slow, distracted, distant. She had no idea that this was her final performance, that I'd already made decisions she wouldn't even be aware of until much later. After we cleaned up, she asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said no. I told her I was going to read. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She took a glass of wine upstairs, humming a tune I didn't recognize. 10 minutes later, I heard the shower turn on. Another 15, and the loft went dark. Then the real silence began. I sat by the fireplace, watching the logs collapse into embers, letting the heat sink into my skin. I didn't blink much. Didn't move. Just listened. To the wind. To the faint dripping sound of melting snow from the roof. To the way old buildings shift and groan when they're trying to hold themselves together. She came back down around midnight. In a t-shirt that wasn't mine. Barefoot. Looking softer than she had in months. "I can't sleep," she said. I nodded, flipping a page I wasn't reading. "Try lavender tea." She sat across from me. Not next to me. Like she was waiting for something. Then she said it. "You've been different lately." I said nothing. I don't mean distant. I mean colder. Still nothing. "You don't touch me anymore," she added, barely a whisper now. That was rich. The woman who had spent the past 3 months touching someone else with the same hands she now folded in her lap like a penitent child. "I guess I'm tired," I said finally. "Or maybe I'm just seeing clearly." She frowned. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Just enough to show that the words landed somewhere soft inside her. "I want to fix this," she said. That's when I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just slipped out, dry, short, humorless. "What's so funny?" she asked, her voice rising. I looked her dead in the eye. "You want to fix a house after you've already sold the keys." She froze. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. She wanted to ask what I meant. Wanted to play dumb. But something in my tone, or maybe in the way I didn't flinch, told her the performance was over. She stood up. "I'm going to bed," she said. I nodded. And as she climbed the stairs, I watched her legs shake slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to let me know one thing. She knew. She knew that I knew. But she still didn't know how much. Or what I was going to do next. And that uncertainty? That was the beginning of my freedom. The next morning, I woke to the sound of crunching snow. Not the quiet, delicate kind, but sharp, heavy steps. I sat up slowly. Callie was still asleep upstairs, one leg out from under the blanket like always. Her face was turned toward the window. Peaceful. Or pretending. With her, I was never sure anymore. I moved to the front window and peeled back the curtain just enough to see. There was a man standing at the edge of the driveway. Not close. Not threatening. Just watching. He was wearing a thick parka, hood up, hands in his pockets. I couldn't make out his face, but something about his stance was off. Too still. Too centered. Like he hadn't just wandered there. Like he had come for something. My first instinct was to grab my coat and step outside, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he didn't react when I moved. Didn't flinch. Just stood there. After 30, maybe 40 seconds, He turned and walked slowly back into the tree line until he disappeared completely. I stood there long after he was gone. We hadn't seen another soul since we arrived. That was the whole point of this place, complete isolation. I had specifically picked a cabin listed as unplugged. The owner had even mentioned it wasn't on GPS maps anymore. So what was this guy doing here? I waited 2 hours before I brought it up to Callie. I didn't want her panic to feel justified, not yet. She was already operating under some unspoken fear, and I wanted that to simmer a bit longer before boiling. But she brought it up first. We were sitting on the deck that afternoon, wrapped in mismatched blankets, drinking instant cocoa. She was quieter than usual, staring into the trees like they might answer questions she didn't want to ask me. "Did you see someone this morning?" she said, barely above a whisper. I looked at her, calm, expressionless. "What do you mean?" "I thought I saw someone near the trees," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Probably nothing. Just freaked myself out." I waited a beat too long to answer. "You sure it wasn't a dream?" I said. She didn't respond, just sipped her cocoa and looked away. That was the first time I saw it, real fear. Not guilt, not anxiety, not suspicion. Fear, and not of being caught. Fear of not knowing what was real anymore. I could have eased her mind. Could have told her I saw the man too. But I didn't. I needed her to keep guessing. That was the only way this would work. Later that evening, I went out alone under the pretense of grabbing more firewood. Instead, I followed the tracks in the snow. They led deep into the trees, farther than I expected. I walked almost half a mile before they veered sharply and vanished. No return prints. No boot-shaped depressions leading back toward the road. Just gone. I stood there in the silence, surrounded by trees creaking in the wind, and I felt it again. That same sensation I'd had at dinner a week earlier, that I was no longer watching a performance. I was in one. Back at the cabin, Callie was curled on the couch with a blanket and a book. But she wasn't reading. She was listening for sounds. Every creak of the floor, every distant howl of wind against the chimney made her flinch. I sat down next to her without a word. She didn't lean into me like she used to. Didn't even shift her weight. The space between us was a war zone neither of us wanted to step into. "I didn't sleep well last night," she said eventually. "I kept having this dream I was being followed." I said nothing. She continued, almost to herself, not chased, just watched. Like I was walking through a city and no one was moving, just staring at me. I waited a long time, then finally spoke. "Maybe you feel guilty." She turned to me slowly. "What?" "Guilt," I said. "It can do strange things to the brain, even make you see people who aren't there." She didn't answer, didn't even blink, just looked at me like she wasn't sure what language I was speaking. She knew. She absolutely knew. But here's the twist. I wasn't trying to scare her. Not really. I just wanted her to understand what it felt like. What I had felt for months. That disorientation. That slow burn dread. That gnawing sense that something is just out of place. And it's you. I waited until she went to bed before I checked the cameras. I hadn't told her about them. Small wildlife cams hidden in the trees, feeding back into my laptop via local wireless connection. I'd set them up the day before we arrived. Nothing. No movement. No man. Either he'd known where the blind spots were, or he'd never been real to begin with. That night, I barely slept. But it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because I was finally starting to enjoy this. The tension, the silence, the unraveling, and I wasn't sure who I was becoming anymore. It was just past 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. Not a bang, not a slam, just a quiet, drawn-out creak, like someone was trying not to be heard. I didn't move right away. I stayed in bed, eyes open, breath shallow. Callie was gone. Her side of the bed was cold. I reached over and touched the blanket, but it was already beginning to stiffen in the cabin air. That told me she'd been up for a while, long enough to decide she wasn't coming back to bed, long enough to put on boots, a coat, gloves, all without waking me. Or maybe she didn't care if I woke up. I got up quietly and moved to the window. The porch light was off, but the moon gave me enough to see. Her footprints led down the snow-covered path, past the tree line, toward the road. The same path I had followed days earlier when I found the tracks that ended without a return. For a moment, I just stood there, watching, wondering, was she going to meet him? Was she running away? Or was she just trying to feel in control again? None of the answers mattered. What mattered was that she didn't wake me. She didn't even leave a note. No excuse, no alibi, No lie prepared. Just gone. I grabbed my coat and followed her steps without turning on a light. The cold was sharp, the kind that doesn't sting but sinks. The forest was unnervingly still. No owls, no rustling. Just the sound of my boots crunching in her trail. I followed her path deeper and deeper, each step more surreal than the last, until the trees began to thin and the cabin was no longer visible behind me. And then they stopped. Her footprints ended abruptly at the edge of a small clearing, the same clearing where the man had stood. No turn, no return path, just one final pair of footprints, side by side, facing nothing. I circled the area 3 times, checked the tree line, looked for any sign of detour or disturbance. Nothing. The snow was undisturbed in every direction. She was gone. Not missing. Not hiding. Gone. I stood there for a long time, unsure whether to scream or whisper. Part of me thought this was still her game. Another move in the long, slow chess match we'd been playing since the night of that dinner. But this didn't feel like a move. This felt like a reset. A full wipe of the board. I turned and made my way back to the cabin, feeling the frost set into my knuckles, my fingertips going numb. I left the door unlocked when I went inside, sat down in front of the dead fireplace, and stared into the empty hearth. My breath came in soft plumes of fog. I didn't try to warm up. I needed to feel the cold now. It was the only thing real. At 6:13 a.m., her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A single notification. "Hey, you there?" I walked over slowly, picked it up. No password. She had stopped locking her phone, probably out of guilt, or maybe arrogance. I opened the message thread. Arlo had texted her 7 times over the past 12 hours. All one-liners. All nervous. The last one read, "I don't like this. Something feels off. Call me back. Please." I didn't respond. Instead, I set the phone down, face up, and walked into the bathroom. Turned on the faucet. Watched the water run. My face in the mirror looked foreign. My pupils were blown wide, skin pale, beard longer than I remembered. I looked like someone on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. When I came back out, I expected to feel something. Panic, grief, maybe even relief. But there was nothing. Just that humming quiet. No more lies. No more guessing. Just absence. And for the first time in months, the house felt balanced. Still, like it was finally done holding its breath. But then the power went out. Just like that. No warning, no flicker. 1 second the cabin was humming with faint electric heat, the fridge gently buzzing, the laptop charging in the corner, and the next, black. Complete and total blackness. I stood in the middle of the room and let it happen. Didn't reach for my phone. Didn't grab a flashlight. I just waited. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure anymore if I was the one watching this story unfold, or if I was being watched myself. When the power went out, I stood there in the darkness for what felt like hours, waiting for something to break. A sound, a voice, the door creaking open. But nothing came. Just silence. No monsters. No ghosts. Just me and the weight I'd been carrying for far too long. By morning, the lights flickered back on. The fridge hummed again. The cabin's systems blinked awake like nothing had happened. The only thing that didn't return was Callie. Her phone was still on the counter. Her boots by the door. Her jacket folded over the stair rail. All of her here. Except her. I called the local ranger station. Reported a possible lost hiker. Gave a vague description. Didn't mention the affair. Didn't mention the months of lies or the man in the trees. Just enough to get someone looking. I wasn't trying to cover up anything. I wasn't trying to get away with something. I was finally ready to let go. A search team arrived that afternoon. They asked questions. I answered with a strange calm. No tears. No theatrics. Just truth, the edited version. They told me not to go back into the woods. I nodded. I had no intention of going back there anyway. 3 days later, they found her. Alive. Confused, dehydrated, shaken, but alive. She claimed she got lost. That she followed a trail she thought circled back around. That her phone died. That she slept under a fallen tree the first night. Then wandered until she saw a flare the search team had launched. I watched her tell the story from the hospital bed, voice flat, hands shaking. She avoided my eyes the whole time. They asked if we wanted a moment alone. I said yes. And when the nurse closed the door, she finally looked at me. Her eyes were different. Not terrified. Not ashamed. Empty. She whispered, "I thought you were going to leave me out there." I said nothing at first. Then I stepped closer. Sat at the edge of the bed. Let the quiet settle between us like dust. I did, I said. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just nodded. Like she knew. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. And for the first time, I believed her. Because it wasn't about hurting me. It never was. It was about filling something in herself that had nothing to do with me. I just happened to be standing closest when the damage began. I want to fix it, she whispered. I shook my head gently. You can't fix something that never belonged to you. She blinked. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. I stood up, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and walked out without looking back. It's been 6 months since then. I live in a different city now. New apartment, new job, new routine. No drama, no games, just peace. I started running again. Not to punish myself or chase some broken sense of strength, just to feel the rhythm of breath and movement. To be present in my body again. I adopted a dog from a shelter 2 weeks ago. Named him Dorian, after the wind that nearly knocked my porch over last fall, but left me standing. I still think about her sometimes. Not out of longing, not out of regret. Just reflection, like a storm that passed, leaving trees uprooted but soil richer than before. People ask why I'm not bitter, why I don't hate her. But hate is just another form of attachment, and I've given her enough of that. The truth is, she didn't destroy me. She released me. And when I walk outside now, when I feel the sun on my face and the wind in my chest, when I look out at the world with clear eyes for the first time in years, I remind myself of one thing. The daylight doesn't lie, and neither do I anymore.